Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are listening, you are doing well, that you're having a great start to your week, and wherever you are and wherever you're listening, you are enjoying the fact that for the seventh straight season, the Atlanta Braves have made the playoffs. Yay! Woo! As always, my podcast partner here with me, Stephen Tolbert. Stephen, we've been talking about it all year long. How can the Braves make the playoffs? Are they going to make the playoffs? There were times where I can certainly say we were doubtful that they were, but they once again have made it, and they did it in about the most lackluster way possible. But hey, it's not how you get there. It's the fact that you got there, and at least they're there.
Yeah, what's up, Shawn? Yeah, what a perfect way to clinch for this team. This team has been, it's objectively a good team because I think their final record is 89 and 73 or 74, whatever. Yeah, 73, which is objectively a good team. And they made the playoffs, which is another objective measure for measuring a good team. But this team has not been the most enjoyable to watch for the better part of 5 months. It's been a slog to watch at times, and it's been downright frustrating and annoying to watch, especially on the offensive side. And so it makes sense that the game or the day that they clinch is not one that you're just like overwhelmed with joy. It's just kind of been it's been a frustrating day. It's been an annoying day. It's been a surprising day. We're going to get into all the Chris Sale stuff. And it's just kind of, okay, we made it. And, most of the time when you clinch a playoff spot, it's like this huge celebratory thing. But that just wouldn't be 2024. The way this season has gone, it makes sense that today is more of a, I don't want to say melancholy, but it's definitely more of a reserved, celebration for making the playoffs. A, because of how it happened, which we're going to talk about. B, because of the Sale news, and C, just, the way game 2 went. And it's just it's a muted reaction for a somewhat muted year. And it kind of fits.
Absolutely. And of course, again, we can't thank you enough for being with us. Myself, Shawn Coleman, with Stephen Tolbert. Obviously, two of the four great team members here at Hammer Territory. Don't forget that later on this evening into tomorrow, Brad Rowland and Scott Coleman will have a full preview of the Braves as they head out to San Diego for the best of 3 wild card series against the Padres. Me and Stephen will give our, thoughts on the Padres series as well. But for an in-depth breakdown, Scott Coleman and Brad Rowland will be with you later on tonight into tomorrow with an additional podcast previewing the wild card series against the Padres. And to be honest with you, Stephen, I think the other thing that kind of stands out is that all season long, with as much adversity as we've overcome, with the fact that we, just continued to fight back against things that were within our control with how much the offense has struggled, and outside of our control when it came to injuries, it just felt like that at some point, things, outside of our control, things would fall into place. We would have a bit of better luck go our way. But it just never seemed to happen. And we certainly didn't help ourselves, a lot of times offensively. But for today, the offense did its job in game 1. The bullpen struggled, and we'll talk about the bullpen a little bit later on. But the general point that I'm making is that it just seems like all year long we've been like, okay, maybe we're finally getting this breakthrough. Maybe we're finally going to get this stretch of good luck. Maybe we're finally going to have the team clicking on all cylinders. And it never really happened. Maybe end of August into September it did, but it never really happened. I'm happy they made the playoffs. It feels great to once again be there. It's definitely a compliment to the coaching staff and to the players, but I'm not going to sit here and lie. Don't have a lot of confidence going into the playoffs, especially how they played on Monday.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird feeling. You're excited to be going. And the team objectively has played better in September than probably any other month other than April. And so you do kind of lean on that. But the way they played on Sunday against the Royals, just an offensively lifeless game. The way they played today in game one, the offense was lifeless for most of the game, and then just randomly in the eighth inning, it went crazy, and the Braves scored, 4 runs, and that whole game was crazy. But yeah, the way they've played, on top of some of the injury stuff, it is it's a very reserved feeling at the moment about you're very excited to get in. Listen, if they had lost game two today and they did not get in, it would have been a very frustrating podcast. So the fact that they won game two, as much as game two was an actual competition, they did win game two and they're in the playoffs. So that is a much better feeling than what this podcast could have been. And so we do want to celebrate that. Making the playoffs is not easy. They had to win 89 games to do it, and that's more than what you usually have to win to make the playoffs, especially in the wild card, with expanded playoffs. So it's not easy, and the Braves had injuries, and winning this many games with this many injuries, it should be celebrated. Like, that is an accomplishment, and I don't want to just completely gloss over that. But at the same time, the way they're playing right now, especially offensively, especially in game two when the Mets weren't really trying that hard, that game against the Royals, there's not a lot of confidence moving forward, but you're in the playoffs, and that's better than not being in the playoffs. Even if it's a short trip to the playoffs, you'd still much rather be there than not.
We get it. Mornings are nuts. No time for breakfast, but you need to get your day started right.
What if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds? Support for Foul Territory is brought to you by Huel, the world's #1 complete nutrition brand. With over 400 million meals sold worldwide, Huel is trusted by millions of people looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with this exclusive FT offer. 15% off with the code FOUL at Huel.com.
You know we're all about saving time, but we get hangry, like a lot. I recently fell in love with the Huel Ultimate Super Greens Powder, which is a perfect blend of 91 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. I also love their complete nutrition bars, and those hot and savory pouches are fire too.
FT fam, give it a shot. Get 15% off with the code FOUL at HUEL.com. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with Huel. Nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters.
So let's get to the good of the day, though there was far more head scratching and somewhat negative, occurrences on Monday during the doubleheader that thankfully the Braves were able to win game two of. But in game one, there were a few positives, in my opinion. The Braves did, when both teams were playing competitively, the Braves, with the starters on the mound, they got their job done in terms of hitting for power. They were the more powerful team, which we've seen all year long. When they hit home runs, they can still win against quality teams. But even more so, we continue to see Spencer Schwellenbach is about as good as he can be and about as good as anybody else all season long when it comes to facing quality opponents. I don't have the list of names in front of me, but if you were to stack up what Spencer Schwellenbach has done as a rookie, in his rookie season against that year's best teams, you would find that he is among some very, very notable names with how good he's been. And Stephen, it's unfortunate that we won't be able to see him in the wild card round. I certainly hope we might be able to see him potentially, in LA for sure if we make it past San Diego. But at the very least, whether or not this is Spencer Schwellenbach's last start of the season, one thing that stands out: the future is extremely bright, both for Spencer Schwellenbach and for the Braves. And it's great to see that he can be relied upon in big games, and he pitched the biggest game of his life on Monday.
Yeah, it really was the game of his life. I mean, it was the biggest game he's ever pitched by far and away. It was essentially a playoff game, and he was awesome. I mean, 7 scoreless innings. I know he came back in the 8th and gave up a double, and that run did end up scoring. So technically, he went 7 plus with 1 earned run. But that run didn't score when he was on the mound. And there were some crazy things that happened in that inning that we'll get to here in a second. But yeah, he was fantastic. I mean, he was awesome. And I know Mets fans hate him because he shut down the Mets like 2 or 3 times this year, including last week, the first game, the only game of that series that didn't get rained out. He did the same thing to him. So yeah, it was really good to see. He's been unbelievable. The fact that the Braves did not win on Sunday against the Royals when they had every chance to win that game means, Spencer had to pitch today, which means he's not going to be able to pitch in the wild card. That's the cost. That's essentially the cost of not winning that game against Kansas City on Sunday, is that you had to pitch Spencer today, and that means he can't pitch in the wild card. And so there's a penalty for not being able to beat, a Kansas City team that had nothing to play for on Sunday. And that penalty is you don't get Spencer Schwellenbach in the wild card round. So yeah, it's I don't want to take away from Spencer though, because he was incredible. And the Mets had no answer for him. And I really hope the Braves can get past the wild card round so we can see this kid pitch in the postseason. That would be awesome if he got to pitch against like the Dodgers or something. I don't know that it's going to happen, but I was so incredibly impressed with him down the stretch, where you would think a rookie might hit a wall. As many innings as he pitched, you think, something might happen where he's not as good. And he stayed the course. He was honestly probably the Braves, other than Sale, probably the Braves' most consistent starter. And that's a real credit to him. And it was an awesome game from him today.
Absolutely. And it's just a shame that we couldn't get the job done with him on the mound. But that turns to, obviously a list of concerns that came from Monday. And we'll get to Chris Sale in just a moment. But another, very notable, development from game one was the fact that the Braves, seemed to be in pretty good control of the game, especially with Spencer Schwellenbach on the mound going 7 innings. But then they handed off to what has clearly been, I think anybody would, be fine with arguing that the, back end of the Braves bullpen has been among the 5 best in baseball all season long. But we've also seen them be a bit vulnerable as of late. And once again, they had an implosion on Monday in, that 8th inning, a 6-run 8th inning for the Mets to go up 6-4, and then Pierce Johnson gave up the 2-run home run to Francisco Lindor that allowed the Mets to win game 1. Without Chris Sale, more than likely, obviously, I think that's well known by now among Braves fans, and without Spencer Schwellenbach, you would think that the Braves could potentially rely on their bullpen to be able to really help them out in this wild card series against San Diego. But not only has now the bullpen been taxed with them being used in both games, they also once again showed that it's hard to rely on them as much as we did even a month ago. It was pretty concerning to see the performance of the bullpen in game 1, especially with it being the Braves' best relievers.
Yeah, I mean, that's, the whole tenor of the day kind of flipped, because basically the Braves' best 3 relievers had very bad days. All 3 guys, Joe Jimenez, Raisel Iglesias, Pierce Johnson, they all gave up multiple runs in game 1. And for that to all happen in one, I mean, those guys have been so good, especially Jimenez and Iglesias. Now, Pierce Johnson has been pretty shaky in September. So maybe that wasn't the most surprising outcome, but Jimenez and Iglesias have just been nails all year. And for all 3 of those guys to give up not just runs, but multiple runs, in their innings that they pitched, that whole game kind of flipped on its head. That's a game the Braves should win when they score. I think they scored 7 runs in the game all year long. That's been a game the Braves have easily won. It was kind of a one-off, kind of an outlier type of game. The Braves really haven't played at all this year, where the offense actually shows up, but the pitching staff lets them down. A bit like that Colorado game not too long ago, about a month and a half ago. So yeah, it was just a bad day. I put too much emphasis on it. I do think it was just kind of an outlier day. The bullpen has been nails all year. They just had a bad day. And, I know people are going to talk about Schwellenbach starting the 8th versus not starting the 8th. You give Joe Jimenez a clean inning. I think there's some definitely, room for that argument. But the bottom line is you expect Jimenez and Iglesias to both be better than they were today. So, but they've been so awesome all year. I'm not going to spend too much time or put too much effort in being concerned about it, because if they pitch like that again, then the Braves season is going to be over. It's going to be pretty simple. If you're Brian Snitker, you just got to trust that that's a mirage. That's that's kind of a one-off thing. And when you go to them again, in a wild card game, that they're going to be nails for you, because the Braves need that. I mean, with their offensive, struggles all year, now with the pitching, the starting pitching questions that we're going to have in the wild card round, they need the bullpen to be awesome. And they were not awesome today for sure. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time bashing them. After the year they had, they just picked a bad day and a bad game to have one of their worst of the year.
And at this point, the Braves have no choice. They're going to have to feature their best arms in this wild card round against San Diego. And obviously, that's the whole point of the postseason, to shorten the game with your best arms. And of course, it's hard to argue that anybody's really been better than Chris Sale in all of baseball all year long. But unfortunately, between game 1 and game 2, it was revealed that Chris Sale was dealing with back spasms. Alex Anthopoulos talked with the media, had mentioned that, if you remember that start when the Braves were in Cincinnati, in that 4th and 5th inning, Chris Sale his velocity seemed to kind of dip. He still was able to be effective, still was able to put the Braves in a position to win, but it looked like that he was struggling a bit. And him and Brian Snitker both talked about it after the game. Well, obviously he's not pitched since then. We kept being told that the Braves were going to be strategic with his usage if they were going to face an elimination game. But it seems as if the other underlying factor, and it probably became, more severe on Sunday, was the fact that Chris Sale was dealing with back spasms. It popped up on Sunday. They wanted to see how he would feel into Monday, and it didn't seem as if it was the right decision to let him pitch. Well, now it seems as if that has become even more significant, because the latest news from Brian Snitker is that Chris Sale likely will not pitch in the wild card round. And Steven, we talked about it for the past week. When was Chris Sale going to be used? And how awesome of a situation it would be if the Braves could go through the weekend without having to use him. Well, they got through the weekend, they got into the playoffs, and now they're not even going to be able to have him for the wild card round, and we don't really know when they're going to have him again. It's great that the Braves made the playoffs, but just another scenario in which you really didn't know the outcome. But when we finally do, it in no way, shape, or form works in the Braves' favor.
Yeah, I don't fully. Something is not quite adding up. I don't. So when Anthopoulos said is that Sale, essentially in the second inning of his start in Cincinnati, which was about 12 days ago, that he started complaining of back spasms, and that he's pitched through that before, but he was definitely contributing to the low velo that we saw that night, and that was the cause for concern. And so he's been dealing with this for like 2 weeks now, essentially. But then Alex also said that the reason they pitched Grant Holmes on Sunday was because they did not see this coming at all. Like, Alex said that if they knew this was going to happen, or if this was a possibility, that they would have never pitched Grant Holmes on Sunday, knowing that he was going to have to start one of the games today. So I don't quite understand how they've known about this for 2 weeks, but also they got to today and were like completely blindsided by it, to the point where they didn't have they had to just throw a guy that literally threw 20 pitches yesterday. They had to start him. And, luckily for the Braves, the Mets did not want to win that game, and actually were heavily incentivized to lose that game, because if that was a real baseball game where the other team was actually trying its best, I'm not sure the Braves win that game, quite honestly. I think the only reason they won, and that's part of the reason why my excitement for winning one of those 2 games today is a bit reserved, is because if the Mets really wanted to win that game today, I'm not sure the Braves win either one of those. And that's the part I don't get. If you knew about it for 2 weeks, then how come you came into today with you had no contingency plan for if this popped up again? And that's the part I don't get. I don't know if we'll ever understand. The Braves kind of famously set out with this plan of not using Sale early in the week or early in the weekend, which was controversial. They were going to hold him until he was able to pitch. And it turns out he's not ever able to pitch. And Alex said that he was available to pitch earlier in the weekend. They just didn't want to do it. And so, there's going to be questions about his usage. They spent basically all season sacrificing a bunch of games here and there to other starters so they could keep Chris Sale healthy. Now, when they need him, he's not available. None of that stuff looks great from like the management side and the roster construction side and the rotation schedule side. None of that looks great at the moment. And, you can't do anything about injuries, of course, but you can do things about having, contingency plans and backup plans. And if you knew that Chris Sale was, dealing with back spasms for 2 weeks, I don't understand how you could get to today with the season on the line and just be like, yeah, we didn't see this come. Like we had no idea this was going to happen. We have no backup plan for it. And thank God the Mets didn't want to win game 2, or even probably more accurately, thank God that the Mets actively wanted to lose game 2, because that's probably the only reason the Braves are in the playoffs right now. And yeah, I was not thrilled with the way they handled it. I wasn't thrilled with what they did to Grant Holmes, having him pitch multiple innings yesterday and then pitch multiple innings again today, basically a start. That's not fair to him. It's probably going to cost him a spot on the wild card roster because of it. It was a very weird situation. It sucks that Sale is hurt, of course. Brad and Scott are going to talk about that more on the preview show for the Padres series. But just for today's, uses and for today's purposes, I was not overly pleased with how that was all handled. I felt like they could have been much, much more proactive on a backup plan, knowing that he's been dealing with this for like 2 weeks.
And Stephen, this is a conversation, that we can dive into as much as we want to, in the off season, hopefully something that, is a month away, but, we'll see what happens. But I will say this, you go back to the Austin Riley injury earlier this year, you go back to Ronaldo Lopez with Muirfield in, recent weeks, and now Chris Sale. The Braves' handling of injuries this year has just been odd. It's almost like they've outsmarted themselves at times when it comes to injury. And that's something that you hope that you see a better approach towards, I think, going forward. I definitely hope that you see that with the Braves. Again, we can dive into the offseason, but just briefly, does it feel like to you at times they've just kind of outsmarted themselves, or, handled injuries very oddly this year?
It has been weird. And I was not a fan of how they handled the pitching staff a lot of the year, basically throwing, sacrificing certain games to give guys extra rest. And the reason I wasn't a big fan of it, and I said it at the time, was because there's no actual evidence that giving them an extra day's rest is actually going to get them to October healthy. That's just kind of a wish. And we see with Chris Sale, Chris Sale was handled with kid gloves for basically the entire first half of the year, constantly getting extra rest, very rarely pitching on regular rest. And here we are in September, October, when they need him most, and he's not available. And that's what happens. That's why I don't really like giving up games earlier in the year in hopes that he'll be healthy, because there's just no guarantee. If he's healthy, pitch him. And that's been my thing. If they're healthy, pitch him. If the Braves had won a couple more of those games in April and May and June, when, they were pitching Bryce Elder to give all their guys extra rest, if they'd won a couple more of those games, they wouldn't have been in this spot. And maybe Spencer Schwellenbach is able to pitch in the wild card, but now he's not because he had to pitch today. And yeah, I haven't been a fan really all year of how they've handled a lot of this stuff. And at times it's worked. This time it more accurately probably hasn't worked, and it's bitten them in the butt. Some of it is bad luck, of course, with injuries. You can't do anything about injuries, but again, you can do stuff about how you manage it, how you plan. And I don't think the Braves did a great job, especially here lately, on having a backup plan for what seemed like something that was very possible to happen, ended up happening.
Absolutely. So let's get back to, what occurred on the field. And, now I think eyes, again, we'll see what happens with the starting rotation. We'll give our, predictions of how the starting rotation for the Braves might look, how the Padres is going to look here in just a second. But Stephen, I think that I've said it nearly every other podcast over the past 6 weeks when it comes to the Braves. And it was great to see on Monday. One other positive development, and I'll give him credit, was Ozzie Albies looked like the productive Ozzie Albies that we're used to seeing in big moments. He had a great game 1. Jorge Soler was really the only consistent source of offense for the Braves in game 2. And of course, Marcell Ozuna was able to get a hit to come off the schneid a bit, after a pretty lackluster weekend. It's once again on the offense. This Braves team can have the better offense of them in the Padres in this series. I think the Padres lineup right now is definitely deeper, but I would say that, when it comes to a 1-2 combination, Matt Olson and Marcell Ozuna have the highest upside. And if you could get two of, Ozzie Albies, Jorge Soler, or Michael Harris, the second going, that could really help you out. But the point that I'm getting at is this. This Braves offense has got to show up. And it's not just about the power numbers. They've got to be able to convert run-scoring opportunities, especially against a very talented and deep Padres pitching staff. Don't have a lot of confidence it's going to happen, but I will say with confidence it's got to happen for this Braves team to be able to have a chance in this series against the Padres.
Yeah, I mean, without Chris Sale, without Chris Sale, without, Spencer Schwellenbach, the team is going to have to essentially flip where the offense kind of carries the pitching for, a couple of games. We don't know what they're going to do in game one. Um, Ozzy having the day he had today certainly helps. He'd been really struggling since back. Soler had a good day. Mark has been in a big funk. He has not had the best September. So yeah, they're going to need the offense. I mean, the hopes that this team is just going to be able to win all these games 2-1 in the postseason probably went out the window with Sale got hurt. And, now that Schwellenbach can't pitch, the bullpen has been used a ton. Like the hopes that you're going to win these games 2-1 is probably gone. So you need to score. If the Braves have any chance of winning in San Diego, they have a really good offense. They got a really good team. It's one of the best teams in baseball. They're gonna have to score. They're not winning these games 2-1. They just don't have the pitching lined up to do it. So the offense is going to be a massive part of the story the next 3 days. And it was good to see Ozzy have a good day. It's good to see Soler have a good day. But they need all of their guys to hit and contribute because it's going to be hard for the pitching to carry them the way they have basically the whole season.
Yeah, and if I know I usually during this part of the podcast come up with some positive, thought or positive outlook or things like that. I really don't have any at this point in time. Odds are stacked against the Braves. Right now with the injuries that they've now had to Chris Sale, without Spencer Schwellenbach, Grant Holmes could have been a pretty useful weapon, to go a few innings in one of these games. It's stacked. The odds are stacked against this Braves team. In other words, this version of the Braves, the 2024 version of the Braves, they're going to have to do something uncharacteristic of themselves this season in order to be able to have success, and that's the offense stepping up. Now, that would continue the trend over the past 2 years where it's been the offense all of a sudden going ice cold in the playoffs. So maybe we'll see a 180. Maybe if there's a positive thought out there, maybe the offense can come alive to a level that it hasn't all season in the playoffs, instead going ice cold to a level that it hasn't all season like it has the past two playoffs. Don't think that's likely, but maybe it could occur. But Stephen, a bit of a lightning round for you. Okay, Chris Sale is not going to be available. I would be surprised if either him or Spencer Schwellenbach are on the mound. Maybe you put Schwellenbach on the mound, just in case you have to have him. But if that's the case, what are your thoughts about the game one starter? Who do you feel could be in line to be the game one starter for the Braves?
I mean, I genuinely have no idea. I'm assuming maybe AJ Smith-Shawver.
Yeah.
I can't imagine they would do Bryce Elder after what happened last year. If they do Bryce Elder, I'm gonna need a drink. I mean, you can't even really do a bullpen game because you just played a doubleheader and used a bunch of your guys twice. So I think it almost has to be AJ Smith-Shawver, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's somebody obvious that I'm forgetting, but like Ian Anderson, maybe he's pitched in playoff games, he pitched in the World Series before, but he literally hasn't pitched in the majors all year and hasn't pitched, a ton in general just because he came back from the injury. So I am fascinated to see what they do because they don't have a lot of options. Like maybe you could piece together something with Dylan Lee and maybe a couple other, maybe AJ Smith-Shawver and like Dylan Lee kind of do a piggyback thing. But again, you just have so little bullpen tomorrow. I don't know what I'm fascinated to see. I don't even know who they have. I mean, there's a good chance they're not going to have Iglesias, Jimenez, or Pierce Johnson available. Almost certainly don't have Grant Holmes available. So like, it's going to be like AJ Smith-Shawver, Jesse Chavez, Dylan Lee, Aaron Bummer. Like, honest to God, like I don't know what else they have tomorrow. What do you think? Do you think it's going to be AJ?
I think that if you want to go upside, you go AJ. Could they decide that, hey, we've seen him do it before in big games in the postseason? Could they even go Ian Anderson? I don't necessarily think that they are. I will say this, there are some big pitching decisions to be made because, again, you look at this Braves staff, you're pretty confident that Chris Sale, Spencer Schwellenbach, and Grant Holmes are going to be on the postseason roster. Well, now that's three arms that probably aren't going to offer you any type of value. Grant Holmes possibly would make it, if he gets a couple of days of rest. But if they don't feel that Chris Sale's going to pitch over the next couple of days, it doesn't really make sense to have him on the roster. Doesn't make sense to put Schwellenbach on the roster. So there's going to be multiple important pitching decisions to make. I would go AJ Smith-Shawver. I definitely would. If you wanted to use Dylan Lee maybe to navigate the top of the Padres order in the first inning and let AJ Smith-Shawver come in into a bit easier part of the lineup, I can understand that. I think that would be a creative way to go about doing things. But you're right. They're going to have someone go through the Padres order twice tomorrow night. They're just going to have to give their bullpen a bit of rest to be as fresh as possible for games 2 and 3. So whoever you feel could go through the Padres order multiple times tomorrow night, I feel that their best option would be AJ Smith-Shawver. If they want to go Ian Anderson, sure, but I think it's going to be one of those two.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't even know if you put, you said Sale and Schwellenbach, like you don't even know if you put them on the roster. Like, I don't know if Morton is going to be on the roster. I mean, he can't pitch he pitched on Sunday, so he can't pitch again till Friday. By then the wild card series is over. So, I mean, maybe Morton can give you a couple of innings out of the bullpen one day, but he's literally, I don't think he's ever done that. He certainly hasn't done it in his time with the Braves. I don't know how comfortable they'd be with that. Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, the way this all broke for the Braves is basically worst case. In terms of actually making the playoffs, this is about as bad of a way the Braves could have made the playoffs as possible, where they had to burn all of their pitching. Sale got hurt. Schwellenbach and Morton are both unavailable. Neither Max or Lopez can pitch game 1. You've used all of your bullpen, used them up. Holmes is unavailable. In terms of, worst case scenario was missing the playoffs. The next worst case scenario was probably this, where you make the playoffs, but you burn everybody. And yeah, it's going to be very see tomorrow when they drop the roster, who's on it, one, and then what their plan is for the game. Because I mean, we follow this stuff as closely as anybody. I legitimately have no clue. I don't have a clue who they're going to pitch tomorrow.
So then, Steven, that's the perfect segue to ask you, what is your prediction for the wild card round between the Braves and the Padres?
I mean, baseball is weird as shit. So, if you told me the Braves won like 2 games in a row, 8-1, then I would just tell you that's baseball. That's how baseball works. Like, it's crazy. The offense could just wake up tomorrow and score a bunch of runs, and AJ Smith-Shawver or Ian Anderson or Bryce Elder or somebody has a great night. Dylan Lee or somebody else helps him out. Anything could happen. It's baseball. It's baseball in a short series, but the Padres are a substantially better team, and the Padres are substantially better set up for the series itself. So the money is going to be on the Padres heavily. Like, if you look at the betting markets and odds, especially without Chris Sale, especially without Spencer Schwellenbach, I mean, the Braves are going to be heavy, heavy underdogs. And so because of that, I'm certainly going to pick the Padres to win the series just logically, but it's baseball. Literally, I mean, the Arizona Diamondbacks last year were the worst team in the National League that made the playoffs, and they made the World Series. And then the year before that, the Phillies were the worst team that made the playoffs, and they made the World Series. And the year before that, the Braves barely got in and had to, scratch and claw to do it. And I think they had the worst record of any National League team in the playoffs, and they made the World Series. So literally anything can happen, but in terms of who I expect to win, I expect the Padres to win. They're a better team when healthy, and the Braves are not healthy by any stretch right now. And the Padres are just much better set up. They have all their guys that they want to pitch. Pitching, the Braves don't have any of the guys basically they want to pitch, except for, especially in game 1. They potentially have Max in game 2 and Lopez in game 3 if they get to that point. But for game 1, they don't have anybody. So it's tough to, when you're basically going to have to punt game 1, unless the offense just explodes, it's tough to pick the Braves to win the series.
Well, and if you want to be someone that, looks at history and say, well, oh, how have the Braves performed in game 1? Well, so they won 5 out of the past 3, or excuse me, they are 5-3 in their past 8 game 1 scenarios. But of course, they have not won a game 1 since the 2021 World Series. And that just so happened to be the most recent time the Braves won a game one in a playoff series on the road in a non-COVID year. But before that win in Houston in game one of the 2021 World Series, it had been since 2001 that the Braves won on the road in a game one scenario. 20 years in between game one road victories. And that one win, Stephen, was the only game one victory that they had in 12 opportunities between 2000 and 2019. So no, history is not a friend of the Braves when it comes to game one performances. But you know what? Stacks are absolutely lined up against this team right now. Maybe they come out with their backs against the wall. This offense hits on all cylinders, and we'll be sitting here a few days from now previewing the series against the Dodgers. You have to hope. I'm going to say Braves in 3. We're going to keep it positive and hope for the best. Stephen, do you have any more thoughts as we wrap up this edition, the Braves are playoff bound edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
Yeah, listen, I don't want the tone of this pod. I don't want people to think like it's a negative tone. Like the Braves made the playoffs. That's a big deal. It's hard to do. Again, the Braves have made the playoffs 7 straight years. There's plenty of teams that would be glad just to make the playoffs once. So like, you zoom out, you keep perspective. It's good to make the playoffs. It's hard to do, it's an accomplishment that they did it. So I do want to celebrate that. That is worth celebrating. It's just the way it happened, how they got there, how we find ourselves sitting here tonight with what's in front of us. There is cause for concern and speculation, but I do want to say into a microphone that it's a good thing to make the playoffs. It's something that should be celebrated. It's not easy to do, and the team should be proud of that fact. It is an accomplishment, and we should celebrate it.
And the fact that the Padres are going with Michael King in game 1, Joe Musgrove in game 2, and Dylan Cease in game 3, I actually think that sets up nicely for the Braves instead of Dylan Cease going in game 1 and somebody else going in game 2 and 3. I like the Braves' chances against a Michael King more than a Dylan Cease. Earlier this year, Dylan Cease pitched one of the more dominant games against the Braves that I've seen a pitcher pitch in quite a while. And yes, I think the Padres are a better team right now, but I do think that this Atlanta offense has just as high, if not higher, of a ceiling, especially when it comes to putting the ball in the ballpark, than the Padres. So the Braves can get it done. Is it going to be uncharacteristic to what they've done all season? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not, but you know what? We at least get the chance to make it happen. And as Steven mentioned, that should be celebrated. And hopefully we'll have plenty of more podcasts to discuss the Braves making their way through the playoffs as we go through the coming days. Steven, always a pleasure with you, man. We survived the regular season. Tell the folks how much coverage we're going to have, because we're going to have them covered, wall-to-wall coverage of the Braves postseason March. However short or long it may be, we're going to have you fully covered here at Hammer Territory.
Yeah, Brad and Scott are going to do a show later tonight that's going to do a full preview of the series. The reason we did that specifically, so that we could wait till all the news came out, we get all the updates of who's going to pitch, when they're going to pitch. That's why Brad and Scott are waiting to do that show later tonight. That'll be in your feeds either late tonight or first thing when you wake up in the morning. And then we will have a podcast literally after every game. If you're new to this, podcast feed, new to the show, this is a podcast that does every single playoff game. We will have at least 2 of us, sometimes even 3 of us, do a post-game show. So every single playoff game the Braves play, we will have a show. Again, Scott and Brad are going to do another show tonight to preview the series. And all the way through, however far the Braves make it, we'll have a show after every game. And if something crazy happens, we might have another show, unexpectedly. So we will have full coverage of the playoffs, for however long the Braves are in it. And hopefully that's all the way through October, and we can have a lot of fun with it. But yeah, if you're new to the show, we have you covered wall to wall for the rest of October.
A lot of late nights ahead. Well, hopefully a lot of late nights ahead, but we're going to have you fully covered here. And make sure you tune into the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Plenty of team-specific podcasts that are part of the Foul Territory family. The teams that they cover are in the playoffs. Congratulations to, the Metsed Up podcast who, did a crossover episode with Steven and Brad earlier, I believe earlier last week, as a matter of fact. And then, of course, the Phillies, the Dodgers, all those teams have podcasts under the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Make sure you listen to them as well as Foul Territory itself. Foul Territory, of course, can be found across all forms of social media. Hammer Territory can be found across all forms of social media. Myself at StatsSAC on Twitter/X. Stephen Tolbert at @B_outliers. I know I went through a whole lot of things just now, but make sure you know where to follow us. Also, make sure to check us out on YouTube and subscribe there. We're going to get some video going on during these playoffs as well, so all of you can see our smiling faces when the Braves surprise the masses. For Stephen Tolbert, my name's Shawn Coleman. The Braves are playoff bound. Hopefully, there's plenty of Braves baseball to be able to enjoy and talk about ahead. Plenty of more wins to be able to celebrate this year. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again here on the Hammer Territory Podcast.